So my name is Shaun Ballard, and I'm going to be presenting on my Mythology honors final project. Picking my project, I did cooking with Ovid, and the task was to research and prepare an authentic Roman meal based on one or more of the stories in the Metamorphoses. Why I picked this? I picked it because I thought it would be a good opportunity to read through Ovid and find different examples of when they ate, what they ate, and also look at different authentic Roman recipes, which was interesting to do and is something that I've enjoyed. So, food in Ovid's Metamorphoses, these are places within the text that food, types of food, specific meals were referenced. I'm just going to run through those quickly, and then afterwards I'll explain my choices from those and why I chose those. King Midas was trying to eat unsuccessfully, but he was trying to eat a meal of meat, assumedly probably lamb or cow, and a meal of bread. Pythagoras was an advocate of vegetarianism, and he talked about sweet tasting plants, but unfortunately not a lot of detail there. Philemon and his wife served Jupiter and Bacchus, and they prepared quite the feast for them, with multiple courses actually, and that included boiled aged bacon, doubly colored olives of virtuous Minerva, cornel berries gathered in autumn, preserved in brine, endives, radishes, a large piece of cheese, and eggs gently cooked on cooling embers, as well as a second course of nuts, a mix of figs and wrinkled dates, plums, fragrant apples in open baskets, and grapes. Achilles sacrificed a cow to the gods and offered the cow's blood and organs, and then his troops consumed the rest. And so, assumedly, that's just every part of the cow other than the organs and blood, which is a lot of parts. And then a drink was offered to Ceres by an elderly woman. Ceres had requested a drink of water, and the woman had given her something sweet. It was a drink made from barley grain. Not a lot of specifics in how it was prepared, but my assumption going forward was that it was something like a tea. So choosing a meal / components. I focused on food with modern day local equivalents or simple ingredients and came up with the following list. Doubly colored olives, a large piece of cheese, nuts, wrinkled dates, bread, and a sweet drink made from roasted barley. Restrictions and research. The less fun R&R. Many items had no local equivalent, were too vague, or would have been expensive and or difficult to source in Colombia. The meat Midas was eating was not specified. Boiled aged bacon sounds mildly gross, and aged bacon is probably quite expensive. I believe prosciutto is something similar, but still. Sweet tasting plants isn't specific, and cornel berries aren't available locally. As I make a limited wage, collecting / cooking all other options were not a great possibility for me. Recipes and research. The recipe for the bread that would be fairly accurate for the time. I found a recipe and recreation example from the British Museum. It was a loaf found 2000-ish years ago, and so a very well acclaimed baker recreated that loaf, and then I recreated his loaf. For that bread, a recipe for biga akida, large acidic, a sourdough starter, which was not specified how to make in the bread recipe, so I had to find a different recipe for that. A recipe for a sweet drink with roasted barley. I found a roasted barley tea from Healthline. I found that on the website, and I thought it was appropriate to use as it was very simple. And then also I had to find out what type of nuts would be common in this time and area, as well as what type of cheeses. For the nuts, I decided on almonds and walnuts. I used ancientrome.info as well as a assortment of reading through other sites to make sure that they agreed with this site, to make sure that it was a good reference. And then for what type of cheese, it seemed that it was common for them to have softer cheeses, as mentioned in the text of Ovid, curdled milk, which refers to a soft cheese. A cheese, though, as mentioned in the text, was a piece of cheese, and so a cheese similar to Pecorino Romano would have been present in ancient Rome and would have been one of the few hard cheeses. The text says a piece of cheese, so this seems to be the best example, likely, of what might have been on the table. And that is something that I found through Wikipedia, and then unfortunately the reference from that was a book that I had to pay to buy, but then I also found it a few other places and felt pretty comfortable saying that. So the shopping list and ingredient list, what you need to, go out to the store. Where should you buy it? Barley, pecorino romano, olives, dates, walnuts, almonds, unbleached plain flour, active dry yeast, unbleached all-purpose flour. I got all of those from Gerbs, and then the spelt flour I got from Hy-Vee. Everything else is just a common household ingredient that you likely will already have, but can pick up at either one of those stores if you don't. So the sourdough starter, Biga Akita, reference to Leit's Culinaria. That's the sourdough starter recipe. I followed it as closely as possible, but that being said, I am not an experienced baker. And so it was, to say the least, mildly stressful because it did not end up looking like how theirs looked perfectly because they skipped the middle image where it doesn't look like how it does at the end, and that made me very stressed. But for ingredients, 0.3 grams of active dry yeast, 59 grams of warm water, 292 grams of unbleached all-purpose flour, vegetable oil for the bowl, and 220 grams of spring water ideally, or filtered water. You'll combine the yeast with warm water, stir, and wait for 10 minutes. Once the yeast and the warm water begin to have kind of a milky, creamy appearance, you will combine the yeast water with the rest of the water in a bowl lightly oiled with vegetable oil. Slowly add in all-purpose flour at that point until all the flour is added in, and then allow the mixture to sit for, the site recommended anywhere from 6 at the very minimum to 72 at the later end of time frame. It also recommended around 12 for most juices, and I went with 14. So making the 2,000-year-old bread, this was much more relaxing, much more fun than just making the sourdough starter. So to me, this was probably the best part of cooking and assembling all the parts. I followed a recipe from the British Museum, which was very helpful. This recipe includes 500 grams of spelt flour is what I used, and then I used 500 grams of plain flour, 4 teaspoons of salt, 4 teaspoons of sugar, 500 milliliters of water, and 600 grams of the sourdough starter. To make the recipe, you will combine plain flour and spelt flour in a bowl, pour onto clean surface in a mound, and make a large indentation in the middle. Dissolve salt and sugar into the 500 milliliters of water, and pour sourdough starter into the middle of the flour mix and start pulling the flour in and combining. Once the mixture begins to form in the middle, slowly add the water with salt and sugar. Continue combining until a rough ball forms. Once a rough ball forms, begin to knead the dough until a smooth ball forms. You're going to want to knead it to where you kind of put air into it, so fold it up over on itself. Flatten the ball on an oiled baking pan and let rise for 1.5 to 2 hours in a warm room. I did 1 hour exactly, and I definitely wish I would have let it go a little bit longer. I thought it looked good, but with my final product, I definitely wish I would have let it rise to get more of an airy quality. But then after letting it rise, you will tie a heat-safe string or a piece of twine around the dough, the risen dough, to score the top of the dough. This string is to ensure that as it bakes, it keeps a circular shape. And then the scoring is so that way, as it bakes, it will break into 8 individual pieces. These pieces were likely used as a payment um, in the Roman times. So at that point, you have it on the tray, you'll put it in the oven at 400 degrees for 30 to 45 minutes. Mine ended up in the oven for 40 minutes. And then I took it out, I let it cool, and I tried a piece. But let's see some of the pictures. So moving left to right, you have the flour mix of the 2 types of flours. I'm pouring it out, making that mound kind of volcano-like, and then making the indention within that. And then I have the sourdough on the left, in the top left, and then moving right, you can see I've poured the sourdough starter in. I've started to knead the dough in the bottom left, and then the bottom right is the dough actually sitting and rising. In this, I've tied the string, I've scored it, I put it in the oven, and then it bakes. I'm honestly pretty okay with how it came out. It was not easy to do, but it was good overall. I wish I wish I would have scored it a little deeper because I definitely think that that would have made a difference, and it might have broken up a little more evenly and easily, but that's okay. This is the first time I've ever really baked much anything at all, so I feel like this went well. Making roasted barley tea. This is quick to do. 1 tablespoon of raw barley kernels for every cup of tea to make. Add kernels to dry hot skillet over medium heat. Allow to cook for 10 minutes, stirring frequently and removing from heat at the end of this time. Steep water to 212 degrees and allow kernels to sit for around 10 minutes. A little less or a little more is probably fine. I found that in the first 5 minutes, it didn't have as much as a flavor as I would have liked, and I enjoyed the flavor more at around 10 minutes. The Romans did have honey, and that is something that was fairly commonplace. And so, if you still want to be accurate to what they had, add honey if desired and enjoy. Um, Here is the process moving left to right. I bought the Red Mill brand pearl barley, put it in a skillet, I roasted it, and then I have it in a tea there. It was pretty good. And then everything together, a Roman meal. So as you can see top left, I have my loaf with the 8 quarters. I took a piece out and tried it. It was not bad. I have my tea, I have my cheese, dates, olives, I have not pecans, almonds and walnuts, and I have roasted barley in the very top right. And thoughts and reviews. So the cheese was salty, crumbly, and also a bit gritty. I assume the saltiness is due to the need of the salt as a preservative. Not bad, but also not a cheese I would buy over other options in the current world state. Personally, the roasted barley tea, not bad. Flavor between coffee and popcorn, definitely unique, and honestly, my favorite part of everything. As far as the new things that I tried, it was a unique flavor. It's difficult to describe exactly, but it's worth trying, I'd say. The Roman bread, I'm pretty okay with how that came out. Crispy outside, dense moist inside. I wouldn't have minded if it would have came out a little bit more airy, and I think that's just due to my inexperience as a baker. Definitely not perfect, but perfectly edible still. I'll still be eating the rest of the loaf because I will be moving out in a month and I don't want to spend more money on groceries in between now and then. Everything else, walnuts, almonds, dates, and olives, while the versions of the past were likely different than what we have in the stores today, it gives you a rough idea. They were what you would expect. I was definitely happy to have the roasted barley because a lot of the things in the meal had a very salty flavor. And then what didn't have a salty flavor, the walnuts, almonds, the dates, and the olives, they kind of balanced everything out. But it also would have been nice to have something with a bit of a bitter flavor or a fruity flavor. And then I have my references here.
Hola.
Hey, sorry about that. Um, but just my references, and that is my project. I actually enjoyed making it quite a bit. Making bread, you're good. No worries. Um, Making bread was new, but also kind of fun. I think I might try to find a more recent sourdough recipe, maybe one slightly less based off of 2,000 years ago. Thank you for your time.